we just had this big news about that NASCAR settlement of the federal antitrust case, and this was in response to an antitrust lawsuit with 2 racing teams, including one that is co-owned by Michael Jordan. And so we've been diving into that throughout the evening. We do want to talk about the reaction first off. So Michael Jordan remarked on the settlement news shortly afterwards, just outside of court. And let's take a listen to that. We'll dive back in with some more insights from a reporter who's been covering this trial at length.
I mean, like 2 competitors, obviously we're trying to get as much done in each other's favor, but I think, collectively, and I don't think Jim was any opposite of me, was the fans has always been the best, solution to this whole process and to the sport itself. The only way that, and I've said this from day one, the only way this sport is going to grow is we have to find some synergy between the 2 entities, and I think we've gotten to that point. Unfortunately, it took 16 months to get here, but I think, level heads have got us to this point to where we can actually work together and grow this sport. I'm very proud about that, and I think Jim feels the same.
Jim?
I do feel the same. We can get back to focusing on what we really love, and that's racing. We spend a lot of time not really focused on that so much as we need to be. So I feel like we made a very good decision together, and we have a big opportunity to continue growing the sport. We've got Denny Hamlin getting ready to go for the championship, and we need to focus on what we all love.
What was the impetus that made it today and not earlier?
Level heads. In all honesty, when you get to the finish line, sometimes you have to think, not just for yourself, but you got to think about the sport as a whole. And I think both parties got to that point, and we realized that we could have an opportunity to settle this, and we dove in, and we actually did it. Unfortunately, it took us that long, but we got here. That's all that matters.
I mean, do you feel like it was worth it?
Well, I mean, both parties feel like it's worth it because we understand we had to work together. I mean, compromise in every negotiation is one of the toughest things that you can do, and I think that you can say that we both compromise on both of our agendas, and I think we both come to the conclusion that it's better for us.
There's so much family history wrapped up here, not just for you, Mr. France, but also for you, Mr. Jordan. Can you talk about just what it means to you from a legacy point of view?
Well, I grew up watching his father build this sport, and I didn't want to have to tear it down. I don't think he wanted to be pulled down, but I think on the calmer circumstances, we actually voiced what our interests may have been, collectively, and at the end of the day, we reached some type of compromise. And to me, that's in every negotiation. That's in every agreement. I'm very happy we stand on this step to move forward as opposed to moving separate.
What were the other terms of the
I think
settlement?
that's, guys, that's it. We're done. We're
Thank you.
done. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
all. Let's go race.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Sorry. Go to Bubba Bray. Go to Daytona.
Yeah. Everybody show up at the tracks.
All right, so just a bit of that encounter with reporters after the settlement took place. We have Jenna Fryer, Associated Press reporter, joining us tonight here on Live Impact. Jenna, you covered this trial at length, 8 days altogether, but you heard Mr. Jordan alluding to in that chat with reporters shortly afterwards how this was months and months and months of waiting for this. Talk about, I guess, the settlement here and what sort of implications do you think this would have on motorsport, anything at large with the sports world? What sort of impacts do you expect to see and/or do you think could happen here because of this?
Well, I believe that the settlement was necessary. I think that NASCAR was going to lose the case. It was not going well for them. It was not leaning in their favor at all. And the outcome could have been very bad for NASCAR and the France family if they'd seen it to a jury verdict. So the fact that they settled shows that the France family realized, hey, we need to save our family business and protect this sport. What it's going to mean is what the teams wanted all along, which is number one, permanent charters. And we don't know yet the other terms terms that were agreed to in the settlement, but I believe that they're going to, that all teams, that even the ones who didn't sue, are going to receive a larger revenue stream, piece of the revenue stream, and they're going to work together to build a healthier, stronger sport. And Michael Jordan said from the very beginning that he wasn't doing this for just 23XI and Front Row Motorsports. He was doing this for all the teams, and ultimately what he achieved is going to be a victory for the 36 chartered teams in NASCAR.
No, I mean, we know that here in Charlotte, and there's so many other cities where I guess you would call it, you know, a NASCAR hub where there's so much interest and there's a lot of folks who are big fans. So we know that people are very much into the sport itself, but might not really dive into the weeds of, you know, the business operations. Could you explain for folks why we had 23XI Racing and Front Row calling for these charters to be made permanent? Is there a kind of a way that you could simplify it for folks who might not get the business nuances of this quite yet, but want to learn more about why this was something that these groups wanted?
Yeah, so NASCAR team, the structure in NASCAR, you know, NASCAR was founded in 1948, and it's been owned by the same family, the France family, who founded it, and they privately own the company. And it just has always been this system of, you know, we're in charge. We put on the show, you show up, and you figure out how to make the money to get to the racetrack, and if you don't make it next week, that's on you. And NASCAR had gotten to a point in popularity in the early 2000s where they really exploded. They were making a lot of money, and then it sort of cratered a little bit. And all of a sudden, these teams were bleeding money, and they were relying on outside sponsorship to stay in business. And they felt like this wasn't fair. We're showing up, we're doing all the work to put on your product, and we're not getting an equal piece of the pie. So in 2016, they developed what's called the charter system. It's very similar to the franchise model in other sports. The Carolina Panthers are a franchise. So when David Tepper decides, if he ever does, that he doesn't want to own the Panthers anymore, he has a product that he's got a franchise that he can sell for a large amount of money. The way that the charter system was set up was these were renewable every 7 years, and they were also revocable by NASCAR. So the teams argued in the negotiations for the 2025 agreement, hey, we're still bleeding money. We're still not getting enough of the revenue stream. We need better terms. And they had 4 core pillars that they wanted. One of the very important pillars that they wanted was that the charters become permanent. So that, and another word that you may hear that uses evergreen. And that's sort of a way to skirt around the word permanent that the France family so opposed. But they wanted them to become permanent so that they had an asset that could grow in equity. And when you have an interested buyer, you could charge a lot more money for it because this was something that would never be taken away. Just the way that the Panthers continue to grow in value, the way that the Hornets continue to grow in value, they wanted that very much. And they wanted better terms on the other 3 items, the other 3 pillars that they were fighting for. But that key piece was that they wanted them permanent. NASCAR wouldn't budge on it. They gave the teams their final offer in September of 2024. It came in around 5 o'clock at night during the first weekend of the playoffs. They said, sign this by the end of the day, midnight, or you're going to lose your charters. 13 of the teams, 13 of the organizations, they felt they had no choice, that they were going to go out of business. This was the best deal that they were going to get. They signed it. Michael Jordan said, I'm not signing it. I'm not going to take the deal. And then Front Row Motorsports said that they didn't like the deal either, and they aligned with Michael Jordan. They felt that, you know, let me roll the dice with Michael Jordan. He's a big player. He's got a lot of power. He's got a lot of money to fund this kind of fight. So tiny little Front Row Motorsports joined in on it. Those 2 teams since September of 2024 have been fighting this fight. We're probably looking at around $100 million in attorney fees between both sides, maybe more. And Michael Jordan went the distance on it. He wouldn't relent. And every day of the 8 days was worse and worse and worse for NASCAR. And when they finally began to present their case on Wednesday, it became, through their first 3 witnesses, pretty obvious that they weren't trying to fight the antitrust claims. They were more trying to mitigate damages. They were more arguing, hey, we only have this much money. This is our bottom line. We can't give you the $700 million a year that the teams were asking for. This is why. And at the end of the day yesterday, I think NASCAR came to the conclusion we better come to an agreement before we let a jury decide our fate. Because if it had gone to a jury, the jury could have awarded the 2 teams, just the 2, a very large sum of money that the judge then could have tripled, and then it would have been up to the judge to unravel the monopoly. And it could have led to anything. He could have said the Francis had to sell NASCAR. He could have ordered the Francis to sell the tracks that they own. He could have blown up the charter system. It was a total gamble. And the Francis, they wanted to protect their family business. So we got to court on Thursday morning, this morning, and there was a flurry of activity, and all of a sudden it looks like they're talking about a settlement, because they were doing a sidebar in chambers, they were going into their private workrooms, they were meeting in the hallway, they went up to a conference room. It took about 2 hours. They wound up at a deal, and it's going to be a win for 36 cars and 15 organizations that are the bedrock of NASCAR.
Well, I'm glad you touched on the fact that there was testimony and there was some evidence presented, and it sounded like this was, in fact, getting pretty spicy at some points during testimony. Was there anything that stuck out to you that was impactful testimony, or something that just kind of went, whoa, didn't see that coming? And or was there anything that you felt was super compelling that potentially swayed that movement towards this settlement?
I don't think any surprises came out in court because of the discovery process. I think that those who paid attention and downloaded the court documents, we saw all the evidence that was going to come. So there were no real surprises. But I do think that it really, really it just became very clear that this was going to be in NASCAR's favor. First, when Heather Gibbs testified, she's the daughter-in-law of Joe Gibbs, and she became co-owner of the team the day her husband died in 2022. Her husband died, his older brother, Coy Gibbs, died, his older brother, J.D. Gibbs, had died a few years earlier. Both of Joe Gibbs' sons had died. This was a family business, 32 years in NASCAR. And she wrote a really passionate letter, a really emotional, passionate letter to NASCAR and to the France family in May of this year. And she outlined why it was so important for charters to become permanent, that this protected their family legacy. And she testified that on the day that the final offer came in from NASCAR, they were just devastated. And she testified that she had to take her son to a baseball game in Chapel Hill, so she couldn't stay with Joe Gibbs and figure out what they were going to do. And she left him sitting alone in his office. She said it was dark. He was 84 years old. She could hear his blood sugar monitors going off, and he was on the phone with Jim France pleading, saying, Jim, you can't do this to us. You can't do this to us. And from that point in the trial, everything that came after it was just blow after blow after blow to NASCAR. When Jim France was on the stand on Wednesday, they presented 4 letters. One was from Rick Hendrick, one was from Roger Penske, one was from Joe Gibbs, and the 4th one was from Jack Roush. And all 4 letters pleaded with Jim France, we need this. We can't stay in business without this. You've got to help us. You've got to work with us. We've got to come to an agreement. And Jim France was unmoved by the 4 letters and admitted on the stand that he considered all 4 of those men to be close personal friends. So if his close personal friends were not going to sway him, that really wasn't presenting a great look for the France family. You've got this dichotomy of the France family built this from scratch. They've provided this playground, this business for everyone to earn a livelihood, to do what they want to do, to compete in the sport that they love. They've spent all this money. They do make the show go round. So in some regards, it is their right to run their business the way that they want to run their business. But at the same time, the teams have got to be financially stable. They've got to be sustainable. Since the 2016 charter agreement, since this system started in 2016, 11 of those original teams that signed charters are out of business. So if you want Richard Childress to stay in business, if you want Joe Gibbs to be able to have something to honor his family legacy, and the same for Roger Penske and the same for Rick Hendrick, you've got to make a fair business model. And that's what ultimately was agreed upon at the end of the trial when this flurry of activity happened and NASCAR relented and offered a true settlement offer.
Now, I know nobody has a crystal ball here, and it would be really tough to say. I totally understand this. But so they got these permanent charters that they were fighting for. Does everyone just go on happy family, cordial business relations, or do you foresee, cracks in the relationship going forward, or, feelings that might be lingering afterwards?
All of the above. Even though this was not introduced in court, the discovery process showed internal NASCAR communications that did not make NASCAR leadership look very good. In one of them, NASCAR Commissioner Steve Phelps called Richard Childress a redneck who needed to be taken out back and flogged. Childress testified. It was very fiery testimony. He was very angry. Even though the text messages did not come up in court, the public knows that they exist. And, we had a day last week where there was a fan outside court holding a sign that said, "NASCAR, your fans deserve better." The court of public opinion was seeing this very ugly side of NASCAR and this hard line that the France family took. And I think people are wondering, are the France family capable of continuing to run this? Should Steve Phelps keep his job? Johnny Morris, the founder and owner of Bass Pro Shops, released a letter Wednesday night calling for Steve Phelps to be removed from his position because he's a sponsor of Richard Childress Racing. He takes offense to the things that Steve Phelps said about Richard Childress. So you have these hurt feelings on one hand. On the other hand, you have 13 organizations that didn't sue who are now wondering, well, what sort of payout did 2311 and Front Row Motorsports get in this settlement? Why don't we get any money in the settlement? And I don't know if there's merit to that or not. You had an economist testify that the France family shorted all 36 chartered teams over $1 billion in the last 4 years. Now these teams may say, well, we deserve a stake. I don't know if that's true. Michael Jordan and Bob Jenkins are the only two who fought the fight. The war's over now. So do you pay the other teams retroactively? So it's going to be interesting to see what the other teams ask for, if they're content. At the end of the day, though, they're going to get an improved charter model from the one that they signed in September of 24 because of what Michael Jordan and Bob Jenkins did.
Well, Jenna, we really appreciate all your insights. Is there anything we did not cover that you feel like is a big takeaway folks should know? I know we touched on a lot over the last several minutes.
I think that the one thing is that everybody involved in this case, everybody who testified, they love NASCAR. They want to be part of NASCAR. The France family loves NASCAR. The teams love NASCAR. They just wanted a fair deal. Nobody wanted to tear the sport down. They just wanted to make a deal that everybody could live. And they said that on the steps outside the courthouse. They're ready to get to February and go racing again.
And so they shall, with different structure in place. So, Jenna, thank you.
A better structure. You're very welcome.
We appreciate all your insights. Once again, Jenna Fryer with Associated Press, putting together a very detailed article as well, as I'm checking it out right now. So folks, go ahead and take a look. Thank you. Come join us anytime here on Live Impact.
Absolutely. Thank you, Vanessa.